Hey everyone, how you doing? So, with the PVZ franchise being as big as it is, and with, well, the sheer amount of content within it, I'd assume that most of you would know that some content simply never ended up being added. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to know that, considering the concept art we've seen for Garden Warfare 1. To put it lightly, there's a lot of cut and unused content in this franchise. So, why am I telling you this? Well, today's video is going to focus on one particular set of content that's always interested me, yet I've never really made a video on it because it's simply not that big of a topic. But with that being said, here's the thing, and here's some obscure PVZ trivia. PVZ2 has a ton of cut and unused plants. Like, a lot. There are so many here, and I want to cover as many as I possibly can in this video. So let's get into it. We'll go in descending order of how much information is available on these plants, as I genuinely don't think I could justify the wiki order without there being some comments on it. So with that being said, we'll start with Beet. This guy is pretty well known, and that's because he was in quite a bit of the early concept art pieces for this game. For those unfamiliar with what this plant was capable of, Beet was essentially an early version of Bok Choy. Kind of had a similar gimmick where he would beat his opponents down. Beet? Anybody? Sorry. Anyways, you might have actually recognized this plant from somewhere else. And yeah, you would be right if you realize that this plant originates from PVZ Adventures. It's pretty interesting to think that Adventures almost gave PVZ2 more than one plant. Strange, but very neat. Beet also made its way into PVZ Heroes, so this plant isn't completely gone now. But regardless, it's pretty interesting that it was even here to begin with. And as for plants with completed renders, we only have 2 more. Wow. And ironically, both of them are in PVZ2C, so let's grab some footage from there. The first plant here is Tactical Kook, which is basically a board wipe. Now this plant actually has an explanation behind it as to why it never made it into the international game. And apparently, it's because the developers felt like they would have had to include it in normal gameplay, and that simply wouldn't be fun. They didn't stop the Chinese devs from using it, but hey, it's neat anyways. And as for our final somewhat rendered plant, it's Icy Current. And before you say anything, yes, this is an icy version of Electric Current. Now, the information on this one is really scarce, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But apparently, this plant just appeared in the files one day, and then it just kind of got added in 2C. There is barely anything to go off of here, but I find it to be fascinating regardless. And that's about it for the rendered plants. Now we're diving deeper, and this is where things get weird. I just want to knock out this group of plants immediately, those being the mushrooms. Oh my god, the cut mushrooms. There's so many here. Going in order on the wiki, we have Pultshroom, a catapult plant that was supposedly going to lob more and more projectiles over time. Rotoshroom, a plant that could be manually set to deal damage in one of 8 different directions. Dartshroom, a damage-dealing plant that could only be placed on the first 5 columns of the lawn. Zoomshroom, a plant that kind of works like Chard Guard, but this one would disappear after a few seconds. And finally, Vacuum Shroom, which was a wall plant that also acted like a sweet potato. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out, but there were quite a few of these that ended up becoming their own thing rather than piggybacking off of shroom plants. It's weird, but still, it's pretty cool knowing that any of these plants existed in the first place. Moving on, we actually have some plants that still work, or did work at one point. Burnade is first, and this plant knocks back a single zombie, then despawns. The zombie that gets knocked back will then explode, instantly killing it. And in a 4x3 radius, it'll do damage equal to its health to any other zombie within said radius. So it's kind of a complex plant, but it's basically a potentially stronger cherry bomb from what I see. It also takes the shape of iceberg lettuce, which frankly I just find to be neat. Another interesting plant is Mini Pea Shooter, which is a much weaker pea shooter that can also be duplicated like Lily Pad when it's given plant food. And that's kind of it. I've heard some speculation that this plant was a test for vine plants, but I'm not sure about that, so take what I say with a grain of salt. We also have a duo of sun-based plants here, those being Sunpod and Sungun. Sunpod kind of works like Peapod, with it growing ahead for every 500 sun you have saved up, but besides that detail, I don't know what else it does. So that's all she wrote. As for Sungun, this plant was a single-use plant that would have attracted sun, then shot it out towards a zombie. It's kind of a neat idea, but it seems like a more defense-based version of what the raw zombie does, which is to say that it would have probably been annoying to use. Now, as for stragglers that I haven't mentioned, we only really have one more that I'd want to give any attention to, that being Ampliflower. And all this plant would do is buff plants around it. And that's kind of all we know. Okay then. Everything else I haven't mentioned is either in the game already, just in a different area, or was just not supposed to be a plant in the first place, like the mistletoe projectiles, which are for some reason completely usable on their own. Perhaps those plants and the early concepts for plants that made it into the game could be a video in the future, but for now, this is where I end this one. How do you guys feel about these plants? Do you think that any of them would have been useful in the game if they were added properly? Or do you think that these would have slipped into obscurity? Let me know your thoughts and more in the comments down below. Now, I would like to let you guys know that there's always a chance that some of these plants eventually do come back. So if they do, let's just hope that they do it way later in the future, as I don't want another video of mine to be outdated. Anyways, if you guys are new around here and you like what you saw, then maybe consider subscribing too. It helps me out a ton and I'd really appreciate the support. Now as for me, I'm gonna go ahead and make my own mushroom plant concept. So I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.